Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Power of Creative and CTV. We have a really insightful session today all about how to harness multiple areas of creative, how to make the most out of CTV, and how to really drive results across the US and worldwide. My name is Andrew Henry, and I'm the Chief Client Officer here at Incubeta US. And before we get into today's session, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes, and then we can share the agenda. We'll aim to run for about an hour today. We'll make sure to leave some time at the end for questions. You can submit these privately via the question box to the right. And we're also recording today's webinar, and we'll share this with you after the session. And with that out of the way, I can let you know about what we have planned. Here's a quick slide of our wonderful speakers who are going to be sharing insights, recommendations, as well as some general tricks of the trade. And I'll be giving each one a proper introduction before their sections. Today's agenda looks like this. We're going to hear from Incubeta first with a quick look at the industry and the landscape and talk about the power of creative, before we hand the session over to Isabella from SpeakEasy Political to talk about some of their learnings. And then we're going to share some of the CTV opportunities we don't want you to miss out on. From there, we'll go into our audience Q&A. Great. Okay, so I think the best place to kick off today's session is really with a brief look at the industry, trends that we're seeing, and some recommendations that we'd like to share with you. Like any form of advertising media, creative output is vital to the success of the campaign. Here's a fantastic stat from Ipsos that they found that 75% of advertising impact was solely determined by the creative quality of the ad. Now, a list of best practices can certainly seem never ending, but I think we can break them down into recommendations specifically around imagery, around copy, and around video. And one of the biggest tips that really applies across the board, which you'll probably hear a few times today, is really to keep it simple. So with that said, I'll start with a few thoughts around imagery, and here are three things to both keep in mind and things that we see work really, really well. One, scroll stopping. We want to capture the user's attention and capture in a strategic manner, not just with a lot of flashing lights or something. A high contrast visual, something that's eye-catching, that's going to give the user pause and give them some interest to learn more. Tight crops on the images are certainly important. There's a great stat that there's a 15% increase in performance on creative that was edited more closely. Users want to see a very clear, detailed images of what is being offered. And branding, this may seem like a very silly note, but it is something to keep in mind, and we do see this being forgotten sometimes. This goes back to keeping it simple. Include your logo, include your colors, include your font, anything you can do to have brand recognition. In the chance that the ad is not engaged with, the user will still know what they saw, and they'll know who you are. Next, a few pointers around copy. Compelling headlines are so important. I mean, think about the user flow and have a very defined hierarchy of the copy. And here's a trick that works. Say the copy out loud. You know, you'd be surprised that testing copy verbally may provide some insights. Prompt users. I mean, give the user some reason to have an action. A clear call to action is so important. We're trying to get a response. YouTube shared a stat with us that 50% of their top performing videos had a clear call to action. And just really also sort of keeping that through line of the message throughout all the copy that's going to be presented. Make sure that the same emotional response is present in the headline, in the CTA, in the body copy, whatever that may be. And finally, one last bucket for some ideas around video best practices. Creating for the platform is so important. I mean, there's so many multiple options for where video may be playing, but make sure the team is thinking through the channels, both from a stylistic point of view, but also proportionally. How a video is going to be perceived in a landscape view is very different from how it's perceived in a vertical view. Quick pace videos are a form of storytelling. and videos that get to the story and whatever story arc there's going to be quickly perform better all the time. And bookend the branding. I mean, similar to what I said earlier about the images and keeping it simple, you want to make sure that put the logo, put brand elements right at the front if you can. It will be so helpful. And here's a stat that I'm sure everyone is very, very aware of, but I do think it is important to consider and think about. 84% of the US population are mobile users right now. And I'm sure you've all come across maybe a site or had an experience on your mobile device that just doesn't look right. It's not optimized for mobile. And it's surprising when you see that, but it's out there and it's something to consider. And the final point I'd like to make, which I know applies to all of us, people are very protective of their time and how they spend it. So it's important to really keep ads relevant and contextual for the best possible user experience. If a user sees an ad that applies to them, you've immediately created a value exchange. And honestly, I could probably keep going and talk about all kinds of best practices, but if you remember to keep it simple and really try to think about what the user experience is, you're going to be set up for success right from the get-go. And with that, I'm now going to hand over to Incubeta's Head of Analytics and BI, Jade Arenstein. Jade is based in Incubeta's South Africa office and has been leading on some really insightful projects around the world of creative. She brings a brilliant analytical lens to everything she does. I'd like to hand it over to Jade to tell us a bit more about it now. Jade.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's very good to be speaking to all of you today. I'd like to start by reiterating the statistic that Andrew opened with. It's that 75% of advertising impact is determined by creative quality. We know this because of surveys conducted, campaign analyses completed, and a lot of intuition, because we know that out of all the hard work that we put into planning a campaign and a strategy, creatives are actually the only element that the end user will actually see before they visit a website. The average American is estimated to see 6,000 to 10,000 ads per day. That is a lot of information. In order to stand out from the crowd, there are basic principles that we need to keep in mind, and they are the following. The first one is that we need to ensure that every creative you serve is relevant to your audience. We all know that as consumers, we gravitate towards what is most relevant to us and what we resonate most with. To achieve this experience for your consumers, you can use a data-driven approach where you type creative messaging to audiences that are available in your platform. Next, make sure that your creative messaging and offering is direct, clear, and easy to understand, and that's so that the user can grasp the concept on the first read. And last, because users are confronted with so much noise, follow the tips that Andrew shared and ensure that your creatives stand out from the crowd, and most of all, that they remain simple. In order to demonstrate the success of this approach, I'm very proud to take you through a case study from our client, Hyundai. Currently, we offer Hyundai our full range of services, including media, tech, analytics and measurement, and creatives across both Europe and South Africa. They're an extremely collaborative and trusting client and have given us full scope to implement an end-to-end and cross-channel strategy to drive leads and ultimately sales for their business. So I think we all know that the journey to buy a car is often long. It requires a lot of research and price comparison, because sometimes it is often the most expensive purchase that someone would make in their lifetime outside of a house. And outside of the new purchase online experiences that automotive brands are offering, the journey almost always starts online with the research and comparisons and ends in the dealership when you ultimately purchase your vehicle. It was therefore incredibly important to Hyundai that their digital marketing strategy was strong, covered the full user journey, and met users where they were at in their journey. In order to do this, we implemented the micro-moment strategy that is designed to cover the full user journey, covering the key elements that a user goes through when purchasing a vehicle. And with this strategy, we promised Hyundai that we would meet the user wherever they are, across every channel and every device, with the right message and at the right time. In order to successfully execute on the strategy, we needed to be smart with how we ran our media via display and Facebook. We knew that at a very minimum, we needed to have an individual messaging for each nameplate across each of the 5 micro moments, and we needed at least 3 ad formats to A/B test with at least 3 unique messages across 2 platforms. to speak to the key audiences that we identified for each nameplate. And this resulted in us needing to produce a minimum and an absolute minimum with the strategy of 1,350 ads per month. We knew that there was no way that we could maintain doing this manually via GIFs and static images, so we needed to automate the process. So to do this, we use Smartly, which is a tool that works on top of Facebook and Google's DV360, as well as complex feeds and dynamic creative templates. And through this approach, we were able to bring the strategy to life and deliver on the promise of meeting our users where they were with the right messaging and at the right time. The results of this approach exceeded our expectations. On launch in July 2020, we were instantly able to bring in 3 times more leads than what Hyundai was receiving before. And currently, we are 6.25 times more leads. We are bringing in 6.25 more leads than Hyundai was achieving before they partnered with us. We also increased sales and financial applications and pushed Hyundai up the ranks into the top 3 vehicle brands in South Africa. After we successfully launched the 5 micro moments, we rolled out the tech process to centrally manage and streamline bespoke dealership ads across 100+ Facebook pages, while also giving each dealership absolute control over their copy. Using our feeds-based and automated approach, we were able to reduce the turnaround time of the production of these dealership ads to an incredible 48 hours from the time that each dealer submitted their message and the copy they wanted on their creative via a form to get in the ad produced and live. Because of our ability to test, learn, and tailor our messaging to our audiences through our feeds and technology, we have served 14,755 unique ads on Facebook alone since we launched our strategy in July 2020. We gained a lot of learnings from this process, and we were really excited about our ability to truly push the boundaries of our capabilities and deliver performance that exceeded even our own expectations. Through the process, we discovered 3 key ingredients for success. Firstly, that there needs to be a willingness to test and learn from both the agency and the clients. Launching a new creative strategy takes time and effort, and it's never usually perfect on the first time. And therefore, it requires a lot of testing and learning to get the mix of and the mix and messaging and images correct. Secondly, a strong partnership between the agency and the client is crucial. A lot of strong teamwork between the 2 parties is required to create processes and workflows to drive quick and efficient creative approvals and collateral creation. And lastly, innovation is key. As I said earlier, none of these results would have been possible without us automating the entire process through tech. So I can't recommend strongly enough that if you would like to embark on a similar journey, fully investigate what tech is available to you and what will fit into your ecosystem best. I can guarantee that it will almost always be worth the investment. And on this note, and to close off, I need to remind you that whenever you think that something can be automated, chances are it definitely can. Thank you so much, and I'll now be handing back to Andrew to introduce our next speaker.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jade. That was fantastic. I like what you said about the micro moment strategy, which certainly applies to automotive, but really has applications across all different verticals. I'm sure we'll have some questions later. So thank you again. I'm going to dive straight into our next presentation, which comes from SpeakEasy Political. Isabella Jaye is an external speaker from one of our partners, SpeakEasy Political. As SpeakEasy's head of strategy and partnerships, she works closely with both internal and external stakeholders to leverage the SpeakEasy platform to increase citizen engagement and reduce the barriers for entry to new voices in politics. Isabella is going to be covering some use cases and examples of customer-centric creative and how to create ads that are trend-based to create better experiences for the consumer. We're really excited to hear what Isabella has to say, and I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much for such a thoughtful introduction. It is such a pleasure to be with everyone here today, this morning, this afternoon, wherever we are in the world. And thank you so much for having us to talk about this exciting topic. So as we get started, I wanted to lay out a quick roadmap of where we are going together today in our time. The first are some brief introductions of our agency and the type of work that we do, and then going into a couple of key points that we wanted to be sure to hit, this topic of creative and creative production and how it plays into media plans is such an exciting and broad one. So we could talk about it for hours and hours, but we know we don't have that time together. So we wanted to use the time that we have to hit a couple of interesting points that we're seeing kind of in our agency side, as well as trends in the market. So the first is around creating ads that are shaped by consumer behavior. So asking ourselves the question, how do folks interact with the content that we're producing? How are they viewing it? And how can we use that to roadmap creative? And then we also wanted to talk about this idea of influencer marketing, which has really traditionally been in kind of the retail and CPG space. But now we're seeing it expand to all sorts of different campaigns, from hyper local efforts to get people counted in the census or tested for COVID, to broader efforts around community engagement. So by way of a quick reintroduction, my name again is Isabella Jaye. I have the pleasure of serving as our head of client strategy and partnerships over here at SpeakEasy. SpeakEasy is a San Francisco-based ad agency that provides everything from creative services and script writing to tactical media implementation, everything from Facebook and Instagram campaigns to programmatic OTT for a wide variety of clients. We started in the political space, working with political campaigns and causes, and now work with corporations and social good campaigns as well. So we have the pleasure of partnering with the Incubeta team and are so thrilled to be here today to talk a little bit about the work that we do. I think we have a skipped slide. Oh, here we go. I'm going to see a little action on the screen. So starting first with kind of trends in consumer behavior forces, we have the pleasure of sitting kind of at the intersection between creative development with our clients and then marketing and media plans. So really seeing the whole ecosystem of how that ad goes from the initial kind of script writing and concepting and testing phase to how it actually reaches that endpoint viewer. One of the things that we look at and that we talk really closely with our media team about is how people are actually going to consume that content that we are creating. So one of the things that we found really interesting and has really kind of shaped our approach to creative development is how viewers are viewing ads across screens in many different ways. Almost 70% of people are now viewing videos without the sound in public places, and kind of an equal measure in private. So this could be someone who is taking the subway to work and they are watching an ad on Instagram without the sound, or they're watching a video on YouTube and they're playing that initial pre-roll video ad without the sound, to someone who is coming home at the end of the day. They're sitting down with their family in front of the TV and they're watching the series finale of This Is Us on Hulu, or they're streaming a movie through their Roku device. So the ads that we create play across multiple screens, and that's something that we're looking at really closely as we're creating creative production plans and media plans to ensure that, as everyone has mentioned, the viewer really gets that surround sound experience that I think if we all think about how we consume media, it's on a million different screens and devices and ways throughout the day. There's that 4,000 to 10,000 number of how many ads that we see. So really using kind of those forces in consumer behavior to shape our media planning. And then finally, at the end, we have a couple of examples of kind of influencer marketing and how that word, which has traditionally been really associated with kind of retail and CPG products, is now branching into all kinds of different campaigns, from a small effort in a local community around behavior change or social good to large national campaigns. So we wanted to kind of, move us into a couple of different case studies and kind of creative examples. And the first is really a focus on video that plays across platforms, as everyone has mentioned. The graphics you'll see here is from a campaign we worked on a couple months ago for an advertiser called Turtle Bay, which is a fabulous hotel in Hawaii. And our focus here and our kind of intention in including it is to talk really about how that video does play across screens, that a video won't just be seen on TV, it's gonna be seen on a kind of custom ad unit here that a viewer sees when they're browsing a travel and leisure site, to that family sitting around and watching that content, again, at the end of the day, maybe when they have friends over or they're getting together for a movie night and that ad shows up on the TV. And our thought here from a creative production standpoint and from ensuring that not only is creative powerful when we are testing at it and when we're looking at it within our agency, but also when it reaches the end user, is to really be able to tell a story across screens and think about how the user is interacting with it. So on the left-hand side here, we have that example where the video is going to play by default without sound. It really needs to jump out to the user because they are reading an article, planning their summer getaway, and we'll see that ad. Again, it's a high impact unit, but that doesn't mean that folks are engaging with it by default, versus something on connected TV or OTT or a full episode player where they are sitting through that ad to get to their content. So again, as folks have mentioned, this is a really strong use of visuals, using video and graphics to help tell the story so that even if someone is watching that content without sound, they're still able to understand it and see it in a powerful way. And from a media planning perspective, this really helps create that surround sound content where they've seen that video when they were getting ready for work in the morning and scrolling through Instagram and saw it there. And then they also see it as they are taking a break and scrolling through some lifestyle content or watching Hulu or watching Roku, and really being able to tell that story across screens in a way that feels authentic and powerful. Little screen pop. So kind of as our final case study, we wanted to talk a little bit about how we're seeing kind of local influencer creative play out in the market. Influencer marketing is something that has traditionally been kind of in the retail or consumer packaged goods space, and has often been seen kind of as something that requires a big budget, that you need to work with an influencer who has hundreds of thousands of followers and is really primed to create ad content. And for us, because we work with so many kind of hyper local campaigns, so a campaign around the census or a campaign around getting folks connected to rent relief resources, that this doesn't have to be something that is cost prohibitive and can be done in a really powerful way. So we have a couple of examples here, ranging from everything from rent relief. This client worked really directly with their community partners. So asked folks in the community who had benefited from rent relief if they were comfortable being featured in an ad. They had an opportunity to submit a photo and a quote, and it went on a hyper local campaign through Facebook and Instagram, so targeted as narrowly to the zip code, so that someone who was viewing this was able to see a family that they might recognize. They may have, gone to school with their kids or run into them at the grocery store talking about something that is really designed to help people and to reach them directly. And this wasn't an expensive campaign to produce. It was, photos taken on an iPhone, quotes that folks had submitted via Google Sheet, but ended up being really powerful in reaching people about this content and this program in a way that didn't feel mass produced. It felt really hyper local. We also have kind of a little video still here in the middle around the 2020 census. The 2020 census was kind of an unprecedented effort, both because of COVID and changes in the count. And our focus was to really use kind of trusted messengers to create powerful creative. People like first responders and teachers tend to pull off the charts in terms of trust and trust as messengers. So we filmed 10 different videos in multiple different languages with people from the community speaking about why they were taking the census, from everything from, encouraging people to take it because it creates additional resources for first responders, such as firefighters, which helps keep the community safe, to a local teacher saying, I'm taking the census and I encourage you to too. And then finally, some examples here of, kind of using community influencers that don't necessarily have to be someone who's, super famous or has 1 million followers, but, someone who does the local news on the local news channel station, or a restaurant owner, which people see when they're walking around the community, really, giving an opportunity for trusted messengers to speak about this content and highlighting them. And then finally, all of the creative that we do and that our partners work on us with really comes down to this question of what is the desired impact. We can absolutely love an ad and be so excited about it, but the ultimate driver is, did it reach the audience in a way that is measurable, and did that audience shift track with what the client wanted to see? So some of the things that we're looking at in terms of measurement are site visitors, click-through rates to a landing page, or really, in our space, kind of the ultimate goal of, reaching social change benchmarks, like participation in the census, like winning on election day, and being able to measure those things and track them back to creative. I really love Jade's mention of kind of optimization and that ability to test and learn in market. And that's something that we're really excited about as well. That, nothing is perfect on the first go. The ability to really look at that creative and think about how it plays in market, how it plays out in terms of impact, and how we can make changes at all levels, from a super targeted one zip code campaign talking about a community engagement program that is available, to larger nationally targeted programs that are designed to move an audience towards brand awareness or conversion. So we'll wrap up here and kick it back to Andrew. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about how we're approaching creative and some of the trends that we are seeing. And we're so excited to join everyone back at the end for questions if you have them.
Great. Thanks, Isabella. That was great. Yeah, of course. I think we'll definitely probably have a question or two during the Q&A. Just a reminder for our audience, please submit any questions to our speakers at the question box on the right. We'll get around to them after our final presentation for today, which is coming up right now. We're going to look specifically at CTV for this one. And taking you through is going to be our head of delivery, Craig Brown. Craig is another international Incubeta team member, having moved from our UK team over to the US. Welcome, Craig, and over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh, I forgot that I control the slides. So we're going to look at this in three areas. The first is the landscape. The second is buying, and then the third is measurement. So first of all, why can't we stop talking about CTV? These are stats from Statista, but if we look at this, there's now 71% of households in the US have cable. That's down from 88% in 2010, whereas 85% of households in the US have a streaming service. With the recent announcements from Netflix about adding in ads and becoming an ad-supported platform, really with that being the major streaming provider in the US still with the most numbers of subscribers, that's only going to grow. But also it now means that we can reach pretty much all 85% of those households. So now the reach through ads on streaming services is even greater than it is through cable and traditional TV. Add into the fact that Netflix is international, it's going to make CTV more of an international conversation. It's been very much focused in the US up until this point. People do have different definitions of CTV, and I think people use CTV and OTT interchangeably. The way that we look at things is that CTV is only when it is shown on the big screen in the home, which is actually the television. Everything else, so desktop and mobile, so if people are watching Netflix on their desktop or mobile, that falls under OTT, not CTV. And that's a very important thing to know when you're potentially talking to people about running CTV, is are they embedding OTT within that? There's different plays between using connected TV and using what's on desktop and mobile. And so it's definitely important for people to know when you're building a plan, is it TV only, or does it include mobile and desktop devices as well? And on top of that, the space is also insanely fragmented. So this infographic's been rolling around for a while. What this doesn't even encapsulate is the latest announcement that Netflix have partnered with Microsoft to launch their ad-supported service. And then what sort of disappeared under the rug at the same time was that the Trade Desk and Disney announced a partnership for the Trade Desk to become the service provider for Disney. Now, what's even more interesting with Disney is that Disney is not just Disney Plus, that is also Hulu and ESPN. So where that relationship goes at the same time, particularly knowing that Disney Plus is the other non-ad version of a streaming service at the moment, is going to be really interesting to see where everything goes. It does look like things are going to stay fragmented though. If Netflix only stay with Microsoft, which no one's really sure what's happening yet, if Disney move everything across to the Trade Desk, then we've obviously got YouTube TV buying, which is only through DV360 or Google Ads at the moment. There's a fragmentation that makes buying CTV and OTT so much more complicated than many other platforms where you can just use a single ad platform to buy across multiple areas. That's still a possibility. It just becomes much more complicated and difficult. And that's why we want to talk next about the buying and really where everything is at the moment and how the best way to actually approach buying CTV. So not only is the industry fragmented, the way people communicate is fragmented, there's also a bit of a mad rush within the marketing industry for how to buy CTV and who should buy CTV. CTV is probably the biggest change, going to be the biggest shift in marketing dollars since Google launched properly and offline dollars started moving online onto paid search. Because of that, what's happening is that there's many people trying to make a land grab for the amount of dollars that are moving into CTV. So you've got one side, which is those traditional buyers and planners. So those are the people who've always been buying the television and radio and billboards. They're very much linear buyers. They focus on direct deals. So it's all about relationships and publisher relationships and going directly to whether that's Hulu or HBO or I'm sure Netflix in the future. Going and doing deals with ESPN, it's all very direct deal related. They're also focused very much on those linear TV metrics, so it's going to be predominantly about reach. You've then got the digital programmatic buyers. So these are the people who have always been social display search buyers. You've got a lot of digital agencies who are now making that move to try and gain those TV dollars because it's a huge shift and a huge opportunity. What that does mean when you've got digital buyers is that they want the technology to do everything. It's all going to be completely programmatic and it's going to be much more audience focused than content focused. What you'll also see, and there's definitely some players in the market who are shouting loudly about this, it's moving what has always been at top of the funnel and it's been all about reach with TV down to actually some people talking about performance connected TV and talking about driving sales directly from connected TV activity. Neither of these are perfect. They both fall at one end of the extreme or the other. There definitely needs to be a middle ground that we find. And so before we go into that bit of what that middle ground is, let's just talk a bit about the benefits of buying directly from publishers or buying programmatically. If you look at the benefits of direct buys, it's the guaranteed inventory. So you know exactly where your ads are going to appear, who they're going to appear to, and you know that you're going to get a guaranteed amount of impressions on that publisher. It also gives you increased creative options. Hulu are really good at this. If you do a direct buy through Hulu, the amount of options that you have from an ad perspective are so much greater. And they also do, that's where you can do a lot more of your targeting options with content. If you buy things programmatically, you don't tend to get as many options of buying specifically against programs or particular viewing content. The benefits that you do get from programmatic buying is you get generally much lower CPMs because you're not buying as much against those guaranteed premium inventories. You tend to have increased audience options because you're looking at things on a wider perspective. They also allow you to start bringing in some first and third party audiences as well from the likes of LiveRamp into the DSPs to allow you to do that. And there's a much lower cost to entry. Things like the Trade Desk and DV360, there's no real minimums to start launching CTV and what you can enter with. And because and it also isn't like TV where you have to give a huge upfront amount. You can pretty much enter with any budget that you want to. We wouldn't really recommend that because your impact is probably going to get lost slightly. But really, the perfect strategy actually takes this traditional approach and this digital approach alongside one another, particularly if you're running TV already. With traditional TV reach is decreasing, you really want to make the most of the information that you have from your TV buys. So make sure that you align and you know what your top TV programming and content is that you want to align for your audience, and go and do some of those direct buys with publishers and really help then track the uplifts and the cost pers of whatever you're looking at, whether that's reach, whether that's impressions, whether that's views, whether that's site visits. Go and hone in and have your traditional level as one. And then the other side of things is that digital approach. Go and buy programmatically across your top audiences. You can use your information that you've got from Facebook campaigns, from display, from search, and really go and push that in and understand where you can then actually buy and where you think the performance is going to be to penetrate with your audience. An example of that would be if you're buying through DV360, go and use your top in-market audiences and go and try and raise your awareness by buying on CTV across those audiences. What you then get is an assessment of performance of publishers, because you can see what channels you're appearing on, what networks you're appearing on, but also audience at the same time. So again, it's going to give you a level of, okay, maybe I do really, really well when I show on ESPN. Maybe I should go and do a direct buy with ESPN. The CPMs will go up a little bit, but it will guarantee me a lot more inventory, and I have more control over when I'm going to show there. So just having both of those when you're first laying out that strategy is make sure you've got that digital and traditional approach, and move things further and further into the middle to make sure that ultimately everything comes and you have that perfect strategy. Yes, it takes time, but it's an adaptation, and that's how marketing should work. There should never be this is our fixed way of doing things. We should always focus on how to improve things over time. The final piece is, how do you actually measure CTV? And I think that's the biggest one for a lot of people. Is so many industries have accepted that TV works, and that's just the way it is, and they've been happy to measure on whether that's GRPs or whether that's reach. That's how traditional TV has been measured. You will have a lot of people who will come in and say, track sales. And it's like, sales coming directly from TV, we don't believe is the best way to actually track CTV. Television and the big screen is an awareness play. It's about raising your awareness. The big advantage that CTV gives you is that lower price point entry, but also that ability to use audiences and the lower cost to entry than traditional TV. So you can use the awareness driving ability of television, but do it on a slightly smaller, more controlled scale, so your awareness should actually increase. Some of the measurement options that you've got directly from within the platforms are reach and frequency. Some platforms allow you to track site visits and engagement. If you have any brand work going on, you could also do brand recall. That's obviously something you can do with YouTube as well. So you can implement surveys and look at the brand recall off the back of that. The other thing that we generally then do is look at growth in branded keyword impressions. If you're raising awareness, really you should see that on the number of people who are searching for your brand, and also improvements in some of your lower funnel KPIs. And we'll talk about how to understand if that's having an impact in how you would set up a test for this. You can then look at some of the market share growth things. So how are things in Google Trends compared to your competitors? And also, if you're using any third-party tools such as SimilarWeb, you can also look at increases in traffic versus your competitors over the same time period. With your competitors, the theory will be that the seasonality should be the same. So if you're seeing a greater uplift over a certain period of time than they are, then you may be able to tie that back to the awareness that you're driving through CTV. So really it's then, well, how do you actually set this up for the best way? Many people will talk about the best way to implement tests and build tests. When you're looking at something like an awareness driving thing, really doing a geo test is the best way to set this up. Have test states and have control states, or DMAs, whichever way you prefer to do it. And really what you should be looking at when you're doing an assessment of how you should control these things is, what is the brand search volume like? What is the brand search volume like in comparison to the population within that state? You can't go and compare Alaska or Hawaii to New York and be like, well, there's more brand searches in New York. Of course there is, because the population is so much greater. So make sure you have a viewpoint on the number of people searching for your brand per population. Also, make sure you understand the socioeconomics of that place. That's going to dictate where your brand sits, and also how many people you could penetrate in that state or in that DMA. And then, of course, the other piece is weather. The weather varies so much across the states in the US. So making sure that you're not comparing a northeast state and a southeast state in winter, because obviously the type of things that people are going to be buying at that point are going to be so varying and so different. So it's understanding where you fall in the US, where you have strong brand awareness, low brand awareness, and what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to lean into where things are performing well, or are you trying to actually increase your penetration in a state that you feel you should be doing better in based on some of the data that you already have? So looking at those things will allow you to have a control market and a test market. And what you can then do is, as long as you've aligned the seasonality piece, you should be able to do a before and after uplift and say, okay, when we ran CTV, we saw our sales in this state or DMA increase by 10% over what we saw against the control state. And therefore, we know you can then start attributing like more of an ROI and understanding the impact that CTV has across your entire marketing and your sales data. And then finally, just a bit of a case study that we've got from running CTV and OTT for an iGaming and sports betting operator in the US. When we launched CTV with them, it's been purely done on an audience basis. So there's been no direct buys. It's all been programmatic. And what we did was we ran ghost campaigns so we could try and understand where we would have appeared and didn't. And in the uplift that we saw was a 13% increase in acquisitions to the audience that we showed CTV ads to versus those that we didn't. And actually, when you look back at that on a CPA, it actually came in at a lower rate than non-brand search campaigns did from a CPA overall. And so that's a really good example of where the CTV wasn't driving it directly, but the uplift we saw in the audience and the conversion rate that we saw was so much greater. And that is it from me, and I'll hand back over to Andrew.
Thank you, Craig. That was very informative. Thank you very much for sharing all that. That was great. So now we've gone through the presentations. I'd like to introduce all of our speakers back on the stage, the virtual stage. We do have some questions from the audience that I think we'd like to ask and see, get some more opinions. Great. Hello, everyone. I'll kick this off first, actually, with a question for Isabella. You talk a lot about consumer behavior and purpose-led marketing. How much of a priority do you see this area of consumer interest being a priority for brands and businesses right now?
I love this question. Thank you so much to whoever asked it. I think more and more it's becoming a priority, both on the side of thinking about how consumers are interacting with content, how it is meeting them where they are, but also thinking about the impact that brand advertising has in the world and around behavior change or social good. I think, more and more companies are looking to think about how they can use their advertising dollars to not only raise awareness of their brand, but to also think about how those dollars play in the community and how they're, connecting people with resources or kind of bringing communities together around causes. So I think it's been really interesting to see kind of both from a creative production standpoint, this really data-driven focus on how consumers are interacting with content. And then also from a brand marketing and brand awareness perspective of how brands are looking to make sure that their advertising dollars play in communities and how people are viewing them based on advertising. I think consumers are just really savvy at this point, and are really critical about how they're looking at advertising and really, really smart in how they're parsing it out. So thank you again for this great question. It's an interesting kind of double path of how that's working together.
Sure, great. Good answer. Craig, I think this one goes over to you. How do we know if CTV is the right channel for us?
I think really it depends on what your business goals are. Most businesses want to grow. And I think if we look at what's happening, particularly within the Google ad space and the Facebook space, it's getting so much more expensive in those bottom of the funnels, particularly if we look at non-brand and Google Shopping. The competition and the rates of increase every year are just crazy. And actually, it's still the most efficient area for many advertisers is brand search. If you can remove the need for people to do non-brand searches and push them straight to your brand, that's going to be a great place. So I'd say have a look at what you're doing from your sort of acquisition and prospecting perspective. Is there an ability to try and skip that and go more down the Peloton route where they didn't run anything mid-funnel? They just raised their brand awareness and it resulted immediately in sales because they became the name. And I think you can see that all the way through. You can see it with Hoover and Walkman and things like that, where they just became a basic name, and that's actually what survived with the product. So there are certain brands out there you can see having a top of funnel strategy and then going straight into acquiring those users by building your brand name is something that anybody can achieve. So I think CTV is for everybody, but particularly if those mid funnel costs are really increasing for you, looking upper funnel and maybe trying to skip that mid funnel section is definitely something to have a look at.
Great. How long does it take to know if the CTV is having an impact?
It's really going to be dependent on how much money you're spending in the test market that you're doing. So if we were to launch a plan with anyone, it'd be like, okay, what budget have you got? How you need to have a certain level of spend to penetrate an audience. If you only want to spend a few $1,000s here and there, the size of the market that you're going to try and target is so small. CTV is definitely not something where you want to try and spread your budget across the whole US if your budget's spread quite thinly. It just doesn't have that penetration. You need to ensure that you're getting reasonable frequencies. You can't rely on CTV to be one ad is going to penetrate. it needs to be somewhere between probably 3 and 7 from a frequency perspective for it really to penetrate the audience. So it's going to completely depend on actually what you're trying to achieve, but the size of the budget you're prepared to spend and the size of the audience you want to go after.
Great. Okay, next, I actually have a question from Monica for Jade. Jade, what are some of the challenges getting dynamic creatives set up? Did you have to deal with, and how did you overcome them?
So I think the biggest initial challenge was setting up the feed. That's quite a complex process. It requires looking at structure, campaign structure. So you obviously have to plan it on paper and then get it into a feed and a structure that works. So I've seen people build feeds where they kind of lump all the ad, like 100 ad sets into one campaign. And obviously that's not a viable approach. So essentially what you have to do is like plan how it all fits together, almost like a puzzle, which was definitely my favorite part of the whole process. And then the dynamic elements of the creatives obviously need to feed into something. So it's the design of that template is quite complex. So we got our creative arm to do that design, and that took a while just in terms of feeding in the elements and just making sure that it's dynamic enough to accept all different sizes of images and like different just the different components that go in. So it's really in that feed you basically have to consider your campaign structure, your creatives, your messaging, the images, your privacy policies in like a lead gen ad that we had, as well as your audiences, and then you have to feed all of that stuff together. So that part alone is complex, but it's also really fun to figure out, and we've got quite a good solution going for it. So if you are interested in rolling it out, it's something we can definitely assist you with.
Great. And Jade, I'll stay with you. We actually have another question from Maureen. Do you have stats per platform? Assuming that the user habits are very different across TikTok or Instagram to YouTube. I guess, what stats per platform do you have?
So from Hyundai as a case, we are running on TikTok, we're running on Snapchat. We do find the most leads come from Facebook. We get the most engagement out of TikTok, interestingly, because you wouldn't expect a car buying audience necessarily to be on TikTok, but the engagement is really, really high, and we've gone viral on a few of our posts. But I think as far as actual like hard leads and performance, we've seen that mostly from Facebook and paid search.
Great. Question for Craig from Greg. Accurate CTV measurement obviously remains a consistent challenge for clients using DV360, and most measurement recommendations center around solutions that make sense for advertisers spending millions of media buys every year. Do you have any measurement recommendations for advertisers that spend only tens of thousands of dollars on CTV format each month?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's what I sort of touched on earlier, which is that geographic test and looking at those. So generally what we do is we'd use Google Analytics to run that assessment and look at the site visits and the revenue leads, insert relevant KPI here, and how they're performing across those two markets. And then it's depending on the size of your market and what you want to run. Like I said, don't try and run across the US with only tens of thousands of dollars a month. It's not going to work. So select the markets and understand your audience for something that makes sense. We've actually just launched a 3-month test with $150K for a pet insurance company, and did an assessment of like how many people actually need pet insurance in each of these regions. And that's where we started to break those down to understand, okay, with this amount of money, this CPM, this is roughly how many impressions we can show. We want to hit a reach penetration of 70%. Here's the frequency, and you can sort of back into where you should do that. And then you can do that. Okay, what is the site uplift in a control versus a test state? What is the lead uplift in a control versus test state? So it's doing it that way. All of these things are obviously impacted by external factors as well, but in trying to choose the states that are going to minimize those, that's the best way to approach it. There is no, particularly with awareness, it's the same with TV. There is no golden bullet for fully measuring these things. I think even the people who say like you can definitely measure this, it's all based on device graphs being correct. And you could have someone who the person in the household didn't see the ad, and yet someone else in the household purchased, and that's still going to come back as a conversion. So even with the device graph matching, there's definitely flaws in the measurement system. And so I think actually looking at this and running an awareness piece and doing geographic uplifts, we believe is still the best way to try and approach this at the moment.
Great. Isabella, I have a new question came in for you from Monica. Most of our target audience is 50 years plus, and getting UGC from them usually provides to be a challenge. What would you suggest testing and trying to do to generate UGC that can be used in future campaigns? And they were citing rent relief as an example.
I love this question. I think, it's a core challenge in what we do in politics, where, voters and super voters tend to skew kind of in that 50 plus dynamic. Some of the kind of tactics that we've used have been, a focus on Facebook as opposed to Instagram. So using those kind of optimization techniques, as Jade mentioned, Facebook tends to be really strong in terms of generating leads and generating contacts. So it's a really great kind of top of the funnel mechanism for feeding into follow-ups and feeding into the ability to contact those folks later on in the campaign. And again, we really focused on kind of testing and learning that, one, looking at the data and seeing, where do these platforms skew in terms of age ranges, but then also starting with kind of small, narrowly targeted tests that, while kind of a platform as a whole on a national level or on an international level may have these demographics, that might not play out in practice when we're talking about, San Francisco versus Austin versus kind of a smaller, more rural community. So it really depends on the audience and depends on who you're talking to. So we really advocate for those kind of small test campaigns to be able to feed into those KPIs and then make decisions for a bigger effort.
Great. Fantastic. And Craig, I see one more question came in for you. Are you doing any coordination of email with CTV? And if so, how do you pass data real time between those systems for any sort of one-to-one targeting so it would go full circle?
So the issue that you have with pushing the emails back is you can't push individual emails back to target them in such an individual way. You need to have at least 1,000 people on that audience to be able to do it. Otherwise, you just run into privacy regulations. We're not doing anything on our side in terms of running CTV and pushing that down to email, although the way that we would generally approach that is actually through a creative standpoint. And I think this is where things like Hulu become really interesting. You can run ads that give you the ability to just get a text message through your phone number or get an email and opt in already just with a click of the remote, which is you can show the ad and a button will come up and be like, okay, sign up now. And all of a sudden then, particularly if you can track that with a source from the creative into your CRM, you then know who's signing up from seeing that CTV ad. And then also if you want to speak them in a particular way, if you've got 5 different creatives running, if you tag all of those separately, you also know which creative it is that someone came through and signed up. So then their email experience can be much more personalized based on how they signed up. So really, if we were looking to coordinate the two of them, that would be how we approach it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think that takes us to almost about time. So thanks to all 3 of you for your insights and thoughts. Very informative, very helpful, and it's always great to hear what our general sort of thoughts in the industry are. Before you go, I wanted to let everyone know that we have a really interesting event coming up on the 22nd of September. We'll be looking into the future of tomorrow's world. We have some great brands and partners who will be discussing a wide range of topics. We'll pop the link to sign up for that one in the chat soon. I hope you found today's informative. Again, thanks to our 3 speakers. And finally, if you have enjoyed the session, please take the time to fill in a very short feedback form here to let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future. If there's any topics you'd like us to expand on, we're more than happy to do that. We love getting feedback. Thanks again. Thanks to everyone. And we hope to see you again soon in the future. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.